The Leader of the Opposition, David Shearer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Prime Minister, is it still a fundamental purpose of his government to narrow the wage gap between New Zealand and Australia and to grow the local wages in New Zealand?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, narrowing the wage gap with Australia is certainly something we're aiming for over time, and we've made a good start. Since September 2008, real after-tax wages in New Zealand have increased by 11%. In Australia, over a similar period, they've only increased by 7%. So the wage gap has narrowed a bit, but there's still lots to do. In terms of growing local wages, the members should be aware that average earnings rose by 1.2% in the last quarter and 3.4% in the last year. In real terms, that constitutes wage growth of 0.7% for the quarter and 1.8% for the year, so wages are certainly rising.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Is growth under his government the worst in 50 years? And if so, does that help close the gap with Australia?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, well, I don't have that information to hand, but what I can say is what's interesting is the members asked the question about whether a national-led government facing a global financial crisis and the worst earthquake in pretty much New Zealand's history.
Point of order, the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker.
It was indeed a straight question, and the Prime Minister said he didn't have that information on him and then went on to say what he could tell the honourable member or what he could say, and that's usually an indication that it's not actually part of the answer to the question. The Leader of the Opposition.
Supplementary, Mr Speaker. Does he agree with data from Statistics New Zealand that shows that the average annual growth in New Zealand since he became Prime Minister was well under 0.5%, while in Australia it was 6.5 times higher at more than 2%?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, firstly, you'd have to go and have a look at all of that data because it probably is including a piece that was under Labor. But what the member is saying is that he wants a bigger mining sector like Australia.
That's right.
But every time this government talks about more mining, they reject it. And Mr Speaker, I might add this one final point, because last night the Australians had their budget. So despite the fact they've got a massive mining sector, this is what the Australians have done in the last 4 years: borrow $190 billion.
Michael Woodhouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Prime Minister, how have wages grown in New Zealand over time?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, at least he has friends, but anyway. As I said in my primary answer, real after-tax wages in New Zealand have grown 11% since September 2008. So there's 11% more that's going into the pockets of people in New Zealand, even after allowing for inflation, in just 3.5 years under a national government. So let's understand that. In 3.5 years of a national government, in real after-tax terms, wages have risen 11%. The interesting question is, what did they go up in 9 years of the previous Labor government? The answer is 4%.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Has the wage gap closed with Australia since he became Prime Minister, or has it actually grown by $19 a week, even based on his own figures that he tabled in the House?
That's right. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, it's narrowed, and that's because I don't like the numbers, but real after-tax wages have grown 11% since we've been in government, 7% in Australia, so that is less. They have narrowed, Mr Speaker, and they've grown a lot more than they did under a Labor government.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In light of the Prime Minister's commitment to stop the exodus of Kiwis to Australia, what is the average number per week of New Zealanders leaving for Australia?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
I'd call the Leader of the Opposition.
Sorry.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Does he understand that the current migration figures show that 1,000 Kiwis a week are now moving to Australia, the highest ever recorded?
That's
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I can't confirm that number, no.
The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Order.
Now, look, I've been fairly tolerant of a reasonable level of objection. I've now called the Right Honourable Winston Peters, and I want to hear his supplementary question. The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that a scaffolder in Queensland gets about $42 per hour and in New Zealand $14 per hour, does he stand by his statement, as reported in the Bay Report on 20 December 2007, that he would, and I quote him, love to see wages drop, end of quotes? If not, why not?
The Right Honourable Winston.
No, I don't
the Right
stand by
Honourable
that statement because it was incorrect and it was withdrawn by the newspaper that made it.
Question number 2, Todd McLean.